Well, good afternoon. Appreciate you joining us. There's everything to be gained by being in a bookstore with fine books, with fine friends, and fine conversation. And there's no finer conversation I could imagine today than with my colleague, Dr. Jason Allen. He delivered the McCall Leadership Lecture earlier today, and he is on campus as our guest and as a member of the Southern Seminary family, and always so. He's marked with the tribal markings. Both the MDiv and the PhD from Southern Seminary and serving here. It's a great joy to work together in many capacities here and now to work together. The Lord's used him tremendously. He's demonstrated phenomenal leadership at Midwestern Seminary. So the McCall Leadership Lecture is what brings us to this occasion, but we're ready to talk about all kinds of things. And at a certain point, we're going to turn to you for certain questions that you may have. But until then, I get to serve as the Grand Inquisitor, and we're going to have a conversation. Jason, welcome to the campus.
Thank you. Delighted to be here. Love what you're doing with the place.
Yeah, this is a kind of place where just a few of us on planet Earth, we can say this is the kind of place we dream of and really enjoy getting to see take shape.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful place. The campus is stunning, of course, and this room itself is beautiful. And so, love the book table. I trust that stays there permanently, just like that.
Yeah, so there's normally like a Jason Allen Arthur shrine, but we took that down just so you wouldn't be embarrassed that it was there. But in all seriousness, this is a place where we have two different kinds of books in a bookstore like this. One of the things, and Jacob Percy's given great leadership to this bookstore. I'm looking forward to doing something like this where I'm going to talk about books and how to build a library, but also the essence of a bookstore. It'd be fun to have that kind of conversation. There are two kinds of books you're going to find in here. The one are books we commend, and the other are books we carry. That is a part of the inventory because this is an academic institution, an academic bookstore. But what is fun is to talk about the books we commend, and so that's what that table means. We're actually commending your books.
Thank you, very kind. And again, it's such a joy to be here. It touches on every human emotion for me. It's an honor given at Southern Seminary, Duke McCall, Al Mohler inviting. It's a joy because it's amongst friends. It's sweet because of the memories here, and honestly, it's hard for me not to just drift into nostalgia every step of the way.
And that's all right. That can be a healthy thing, as long as you don't live in the past, and you don't. But I'm going to ask you to think about the past. What's the most important book other than the Bible you've ever read? Now, I hate this question asking me, which is why I'm now
Culture shift.
taking advantage of the opportunity to ask it.
No, I would say probably J.I. Packer's Knowing God in college. And so I became a believer in freshman year in college. You know my story, I won't rehearse it all here, but grew up in a Christian home, college athlete, went off to college. First semester, became acutely aware of my sin. Going to college thinking I would close the door on the moral expectation, spiritual influence of my family. But as I was moved out from under that, the conviction intensified. Became a believer. I don't know heads from tails. I went to a bookstore in Mobile, a Christian bookstore, and I walked in, and I think you go in to buy a Bible, and there's like a shelf with a Bible, and that's it. Right. And I still remember standing there, and there were like hundreds of Bibles to choose from, and not even knowing this dilemma existed. And being 18 years old, trying to sort it out, and I bought a little NIV pocket copy, a New Testament, and I lived with that during college. And then I met a few friends, from which you know, Dan Dumas and others, and somewhere along the way, at that point in time, I was given J.I. Packer's Knowing God. And it was just profoundly helpful to me because I grew up in a sweet church, Southern Baptist church, not a particularly theological church, at least my experience at that point in time. And so this just helped to frame so many things for me, including the importance of actually knowing God.
Yeah, actually, I would give a very similar testimony, and I would say that the second book other than the Bible that completely changed my understanding of Christianity was Knowing God, and it was brand new. It was a classic by the time you read it. It was brand new. I'd never heard of J.I. Packer. He'd been known to Anglican conservatives because of his book, Fundamentalism and the Word of God, but this was brand new. And I got to write a book chapter honoring Don Whitney, Fettschrift, about 2 years ago, and I said, look, in my spiritual life, there are three books that completely transformed the way I understand the devotional life. And I would say that comes after, for instance, Calvin's Institutes, which actually is profoundly devotionally important to me.
In preschool?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the edition of the Institute with pictures. Yeah, that's right. But it was, I'd say, the three books that really, really have helped me in my just spiritual life, my devotional life, were Knowing God by J.I. Packer, and then John Piper, and I won't even just say one book, but basically his devotional writings, and then Don Whitney. And especially the idea of praying the scripture, that revolutionized my life as an adult. I mean, it really made a material change in how I learned to pray. So it's fun to honor people that way.
Right, and to connect with you dots here, I'm in college serving on staff now at Dauphin Baptist Church. We have a guest conference leader named Don Whitney who comes in town, and I'm a junior in college. I'm responsible to help host him, and I get to know him, further know his books, which impacted me, developed a love for fountain pens at that point in concert with him, and it's just sweet how some of these relationships connect.
Oh, absolutely, and just to share a world and a life together is a marvelous gift. All right, so that was the one book. What is the book that had more influence on you in thinking about being a seminary president? Now, I realize, by the way, there are no books on how to be a seminary president.
Yeah,
So
I can
this
tell you
is
the
gonna
book
have to be
that
something different. Yeah.
Yeah.
The conviction to no.
That's right. That's right. So I got culture shift first. Okay, conviction, gathering storm. Okay. No, look, I will tell you that for me, from college to right now, and no doubt in the future, biographies have been so shaping.
Yeah.
I mean, I have right now in my briefcase, it'll be with me on the plane, an 800-page biography of FDR. Why am I reading it? I've read countless biographies of FDR. I just love reading biographies, whether it's presidential, church leaders. I would say in college, in these early years, reading biographies, everything from Timothy George on William Carey to Roland Bainton on Martin Luther, and you go down the line, and they're just so impactful. And it touches on what I said this morning a little bit because, look, I believe in the theory of leadership. Again, I consume so many of these resources, as do you. I try and I try to contribute to some of those. But seeing how people have actually led and learning from that, and you find yourself drawing lessons that you don't even realize real time. You'll be thinking about a problem 6 months later, and it'll occur to you that something similar happened in the life of that leader 100 years ago.
Right. I actually, in the Conviction to Lead, did write about that. Historical biography has been more influential in my life and understanding of leadership than anything else. And by the way, I think there are deep biblical roots for that. I'm going to argue because you look at the Annals of the King, you look at the historical portions of the Old Testament, and even in the Book of Acts. I mean, you're learning by how leaders in the crucible of ministry or of history are leading. I'm doing a Thinking in Public tomorrow with Andrew Roberts, whom you greatly admire as well and know. And one of the things I'm going to say in that Thinking in Public is that I think the most influential writer right now in leadership is Andrew Roberts, and he doesn't know what he's doing. But he writes about historical figures. The one we're talking about tomorrow is George III. And again, you think, George III, the subtitle of the book is The Last King of America. It is a stellar read, and it's about leadership.
Right. And of course, I think of Richard Nixon, who when was asked about leadership, he pointed to biographies, and he said he learned how to be a political leader by reading the life of Benjamin Disraeli. And
by Robert Blake. Yeah. Yeah, and by the way, that's one of the things that's kind of fun. So you see that Richard Nixon, in his book Leaders, he wrote a book entitled Leaders, and it was about vignettes, and they were all people he knew, Charles de Gaulle and others. And he said that very same thing. He said that his understanding of leadership was really forged by, not that you're holding up Richard Nixon, by the way, as your paragon of leadership, but whatever he did get twice elected president of the United States. So you look at that and you recognize what a pivotal point in history Nixon was. And he says he learned from Robert Blake's biography of Disraeli. Okay, so this is before the internet, when I read this. So I've got to find now Robert Blake's biography of Disraeli. And that was not easy to do back in, 1985 or 86. So I finally got it. And the point I want to make is I didn't think it was a great biography. So in other words, it takes a reader and a book at a certain moment.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. No, that's right. And so, look, I always have biographies near at hand, and I love them. I mean, there's certain things in life you kind of have to read because the job requires of you.
Right.
But boy, I love to read biographies.
Yeah. The last two nights I started and finished a biography of Abraham Joshua Heschel. And it's one of those things. It's in the Jewish Lives series by a major publisher. And many of you will have no idea who Abraham Joshua Heschel was. He's the most important Jewish intellectual in the 20th century. And that's saying a whole lot when you consider Jewish experience in the 20th century. And very influential on the old faculty at Southern. You know, he was one of the theological heroes of the old moderates. And so I really want to read this. And I got to tell you, you're going to want to get that. You're going to want to order it.
Yeah, I'm curious what drew you to it in the first place.
Because first of all, Abraham Joshua Heschel. The author is a very good historian. That series, by the way, is phenomenal. Like for instance, the most fun I had in that series thus far is the biography in the Jewish Life series of Bugsy Siegel, the Jewish mobster. Trust me on this. The guy died one of the most Hollywood quality mobster deaths in all of American history. But people forget that, Las Vegas was really started by a Jewish mob. And it's just a fascinating point of American history. You're looking at this. So anyway, yes, I did not find illustrations to use in sermons in the Bugsy Siegel biography. But I commend it to you.
Well, I'll have to get it post-haste. And being from Kansas City, a good mafia read comes in very handy.
There are stories there. Yeah, people forget that Kansas City is where the mob laundered its money through cattle business.
Right. In North Kansas City, where the seminary is located, was the hotbed of the Kansas City syndicate. In the 1970s, the FBI actually eavesdropped on mafia leaders from our campus. And so there's a long and rich history of Midwestern Seminary and the mafia in Kansas City.
He would have you to believe that's history.
That's right.
All right. In reading, so when do you read?
Me, primarily in the mornings and at night, and not much in between, except when I'm waiting, which I always have books in my briefcase if I'm waiting.
Right.
And it tends to be, as the day progresses, less and less specifically job-related or project-related. Yeah. So the biographies tend to be at night late. Of course, we're wired differently. You're working more at night. I'm reading for leisure late at night. I get up very, very early in the morning, and that's sermon prep, writing prep, whatever I'm doing project-wise.
Yeah, so much of my life is because I have to do, I got a Thinking in Public tomorrow, so guess what? That book's going to have to be completely read, marked up, and ready to go. And so a lot of my reading is set by what I've got to do tomorrow or a writing project that's immediately due. But if it's at all possible, if the Lord allows, I have to do some clear my head reading before I can sleep. Sure. So in other words, if I'm working really hard on defending against a particular Trinitarian heresy, which is something I'm dealing with right now, I don't go to bed on that because my brain won't stop.
Right.
And so that's when I read about Jewish mobsters. Even if you're only doing it for 30 minutes, it's just therapeutic.
Right. And for me, back to the biographies, it takes me to another time and place. Right. And it is sort of therapeutic. And to me, it incentivizes like what I got to read to what I get to read. Because there's reports, there's just stuff that's before you. And that's not onerous. Those are things that, we enjoy diving into as well. But if I know, okay, once I get through this, I get to read that, it motivates me all the more.
No, and as a matter of fact, that's an advice that I think students need to hear. I think you put that very well. I stack books everywhere, frankly, but on the steps of my study because sometimes you don't know where else to put them there. And I will tantalize myself. I'll incentivize myself with a book. I will not do that until this essay is finished. Then I will read that. I do find that motivating.
Yeah, one of these days we're going to find you dead underneath a pile of books that it just collapsed on you. We're sure.
What a way to go! Yeah, that's right. May I die under a pile of good books.
That's right.
I don't want to die under a pile of Jewish mobster books. As you think about seminary students, college students, what would you tell them about building a library? Are we old enough that we're just paper fossils and everybody else is digital?
Perhaps, but I tell you, I am so given to paper because I like the tangibility of it. I mark it up. I dog-ear the pages sometimes, depending on the book. And I cannot get beyond that. I'm the same with newspapers. I just won't have the newspaper in hand. The second thing I would say, but to answer your question, the principle I would say is if you wait till you can afford it, it'll never happen. And so I remember telling my wife on this campus, and she is so sweet, God bless her, she affirmed this assessment. I said, sweetie, if we wait till we can afford to buy books, I'll never have a library, just like if we wait till we can afford to have kids, we'll never have a family. And she's like, oh, yeah, it makes sense. And so bless her heart, as I am a student here and doing some little pulpit supply, we got to apply those little $200 honorariums towards building a theological library. For me then, of course, you're dropping hints as what books to have. Danny Aiken was the dean here then. He had that little pamphlet, Building a Theological Library. That was so helpful to me. I began and still do prioritize biblical studies, to commentaries and biblical studies for sermon preparation. And then, I get, every week, sometimes daily, from Baker to B&H to emails to New York Times book review of books coming across, and I'm always scanning to see what do I need. And I live with this kind of fear of missing that something is coming out, and I didn't see it coming to purchase.
You're good, by the way, of course, the two of us have been friends and colleagues for so long, and we know each other's interests. You're very good at taking a photograph of a book cover and just slipping it to me in a text. I appreciate that.
Sure.
You're better at it than I am. I'm better at just saying to someone on the phone, you need to read this, or thinking of it in a conversation. That is, by the way I order a lot of books. I see an advertisement, and I just take a quick snapshot of it, and iPhone's a great thing that way.
I do the exact same thing.
And then I can go back, and sometimes you can't think about that every day, but every few days I'll just go through the photographs and decide what it is I want to order.
Yeah, and the thing about bookstores in general, structurally, for me, they are like idea generators. So I can walk through Barnes & Noble in Kansas City and oddly just walking through there, like bump into a solution for something going on institutionally or an idea denominationally or local church. Yeah. It just, in the walk through here, you see, look at book titles, authors, subject matter. It generates ideas.
No, I mean, and genuinely, and Mary would say that the same thing is true of me, and in ways that, again, some people understand, some people don't. But if I need to think, I'm either in my library or I'm in a bookstore, because and sometimes it's there are distractions, but even just being in the it sounds mystical. I don't mean it mystical. It's you see connections and you think about this, you think about that. I'm not sure what it is, but one of the ways I clear my mind is by going in even a chain bookstore or a local independent bookstore, and some of those things can be really weird. Sometimes that's important to see, just in terms of where the culture is going. But I look at and new books, and that's why a library is different. Libraries, got, if it's any good, it's got books that have been there for a very long time. But a bookstore, especially in today's bookstore economy, you're going to see largely new list or recent list books, and you just look at that and you go, okay, that's a conversation I need to have. That's an issue I need to address. So, yeah, it is a catalytic place.
And I think as well, it not only generates ideas, but reminds you of categories and genres and topics that should be on your radar. Because it's easy to get siloed for all of us. It's easy to think so localized, what's going on before me right now, but then walk through a bookstore and encounter other ideas, other opinions, other issues. And it prompts me to be more well-rounded.
Right. There's also a lot of before and after. So just to take COVID, there are no books on COVID from February of 2020. No one knew to write about it, and then there were a lot of early books that were just basically nonsense. And it is interesting that in the last few weeks, some fairly significant works of reportage have come out from major authors on COVID. And you go, okay, now all of a sudden we're going to learn the backstory, and so that I've told people, just watch. We're going to learn what actually took place, regardless of what people were saying. Eventually the truth will come out. And I don't mean that in a sinister way, just in the unfolding history. We're about to find out what was really known, what was really going on. And that's kind of fun to see come out of nowhere because of history.
Right. And as you know, the Bob Woodwards of the world who chronicle this stuff, they have a way of just asking the right questions and incentivizing the right responses. And just, again, most things do come out eventually.
Right. And Woodward's got his own agenda, but the fascinating thing is people ask him, how do you get people to talk? He's asking questions, and the guilty ones talk the most.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. I mean, they'll basically say, no, I did not do that. The conspiracy didn't go that way. It went this way.
Right.
Thank you. All right. So, what is the book you want to write before you die?
Oh, gosh. The book I want to write before I die. I'm a lot younger than you. So maybe my attention has not focused
now that
as it
you
should.
are a jerk, what is the one book that you want to write before? Write it before I die.
Oh gosh, I honestly don't know. I mean, I enjoy writing. I've got some books over here, a few others that aren't on the table. I have a book on leadership coming out this fall that I'm really, really proud of, excited about. It's called Turnaround: The Remarkable Story of Institutional Transformation and the 10 Principles that Made It Happen. So kind of the story of Midwestern the past 10 years. You'll see some fingerprints there from you, of course, and I quote you in places. So that's been kind of the big heart book the past few years. I wanted to get out. So I don't know. I'm sorry. I wish I could give you a clear, cogent answer, but nothing comes to mind. There's nothing that like I'm dying to get to next year.
Okay.
What about you?
You know, a lot of people say to me, the most important thing you need to write is a systematic theology. I don't know. I don't know. I do think that that requires. In other words, I cannot do that while I'm doing this job.
Right.
Just to be honest, it's not going to happen. And so I would pray the Lord give me health and the ability to do that in a next phase of life. But I think right now the most important thing I need to write might be an extremely personal book, which basically would be a memoir. That I hope would be something like, many of the historic memoirs in history. That's a bad sentence, historic memoirs in history, of which we're aware. Because in God's sovereignty, I am the hinge point of just an awful lot of relationships and knowledge. Sure. And like in the SBC right now, I recognize, and at Southern Seminary, I am on this campus the last human being who knew many people.
Absolutely.
And that's a burden to carry. I get emotional about that, but I am the last person alive who knew, and it's because I was so incredibly young. And some of them were so incredibly old. But I mean, my pastor had done his PhD under A.T. Robertson, who was trained by, the founding faculty. I need to write about these people before they're forgotten.
So what year was T. Rupert Coleman born? As pastor?
I'm going to say probably like 06, 07.
Okay.
Basically same age as Chris.
Right. So did you know as a boy or encounter anyone who had encountered one of the founders of the institution?
No. You mentioned Dr. McCall and Elizabeth Boyce, and I never met her. But I've often thought about my timeline, and I think she lived longer than to pass 1959 when I was born. Never had a chance to meet her. So no, I don't think anyone. But it's the next generation. Yeah. So, and you knew some of the people who were trained by Hershey Davis and
Sampe, sure. I mean, McCall studied under Sampe. Yeah.
Right, but I mean, you've met W. Criswell.
Right.
And so, I mean, that's there's a stewardship of that. And I mean, I had personal engagements with W.A. Criswell and Herschel Hobbs. Herschel Hobbs, I had one of the last conversations with him before he died. And there's just things, there's stories I need to tell. And look, some of it's honor and some of it's, just left for God's people to kind of figure out. This is the white hot heat of controversy and struggle over the future of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yeah.
And Southern Seminary.
That's right.
And as you know, Midwestern Seminary.
Absolutely. And look, that's a story that needs to be told, and it would serve us well to have it told.
Well, I believe, by God's grace, I could write it respectfully and honestly. And that is a great challenge. But here's one of the strange things in life. You know me for a long time. I had to go through years of hand-to-hand theological combat. But those are real-life human beings.
It's people, right.
And I hope I've always spoken of them with respect for that. And some of the people I had to remove from this faculty were people who had taught me. And so there's a sense of real respect there.
So may I ask you a question?
You can ask anything.
So since you're talking about that period of the 90s, how would your leadership then have looked differently, or had to have looked differently, if you were leading then in the context we are now as far as social media, the internet, and just the mode and means of communication these days?
Well, I don't know how much of it would have been possible in a social media age, because you're having to do very hard things, and you can't explain to everybody why you've had to do very hard things. Being a president or a CEO of a very big organization or of a ministry means you walk around with knowledge of necessary decisions that you will never be able publicly to explain.
Right.
There are things that are, for the sake of Christ, people, that's why you have elders in a church. There are things elders know, and sometimes elders are going to have to say to the church, we've handled this, but we cannot. It would be devastating were we to describe in detail. That's why you have elders.
Right.
And so that's in a social media age. I mean, it'd be very, very difficult. Now there was something less than that was still new, and that is that until the conservative resurgence, a denominational elite basically controlled all the means of communication. And so even before the internet, the ability to run off stuff on a copy machine and to have an alternative press, you couldn't have had the conservative resurgence without an alternative press.
Right. Right.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Truth in crisis.
Well, yeah, and
such
other
publications,
things. Yeah. When you think of the leadership challenge that pastors face, what's new? There's a sense in which nothing's new. There's nothing after the New Testament. There's not a new form of sin, but there are new opportunities for sin. There are new challenges.
I think the most daunting reality if you're a pastor is you have 40 minutes, give or take, to try to preach into people something to counterbalance 7 days and 24 hours of media, entertainment, toxicity. And look, I know that I preached Sunday at a church in Kansas City and was talking about some of these things from the pulpit. And I said, look, people like us, we have to sound like we are fixated on sex. And we sound that way because our society actually is fixated on sex and all the different aberrations and practices and all that. And so, look, that is just the issue for our generation, everything from human identity to marriage to self-expression, gender, all that just rolls up together into the great generational challenge. And it's a unique challenge for us because it's not just, the traditional categories of sin, fornication, adultery, but it's so much more complex. And so you have media, entertainment, kids, school, influences, all that coming at people, challenging biblical expectations, biblical ethics, biblical moral standards. And for the pastor, it's on the one hand trying to preach in a way that is pouring the truth into people when they're getting so much falsehood, but also then to lead a congregation and shepherd through knotty church discipline issues. And when the deacon's daughter wants to get married and you begin to get in that counseling room and it's real complicated between her and him, all that is just very challenging. And so, look, I'm still a pretty young guy. I just turned 45. This has changed so much in 20 years since I was, pastoring a church as an MDiv student here.
The next big book I'm writing, a parables book, comes out in the spring. This is the spring, publishing-wise. But it is on the predicament of the church, which for the first time is now considered the immoral force in society over the sexuality and gender issues. So, even in the liberal age, the church was recognized as having moral authority, but now it's a pernicious. The church is seen by the cultural elites and by just mass culture increasingly as a hostile force. Yeah, it's going to be very interesting.
Well, and it shows the emptiness of political libertarianism because that is not going to be extended. Is not being extended to all parties.
No, that's exactly right.